Of her ultramodernist works, it was said that she could sling dissonances like a man. I'm the Classical Nerd, and today we're talking about Ruth Crawford Seeger. Ruth Crawford was born in 1901 in Ohio, but her family moved around quite a bit, especially after her father died, when they struggled to make ends meet. The family ended up in Jacksonville, Florida, where Ruth took an interest in music and poetry. She taught piano to local students and moved to Chicago in order to get her teaching certificate from the American Conservatory. But when she got there, she discovered a long-suppressed love of composition, and so she pursued that for her bachelor's and then came back to the conservatory to pursue her master's. However, she was still able to fulfill her initial dream of giving piano lessons, as she taught the children of the acclaimed poet Carl Sandburg, whose poems she would then later set. It was in Chicago that she was exposed to modern music for the first time, beginning with the works of Alexander Scriabin, who at that time was very much in vogue. But she was also exposed to many of the then obscure American modernists, such as Henry Cowell, who encouraged her in her compositional studies. She was eager to write in a more exciting modernist vein, and so she spent a summer at the MacDowell Artist Retreat before beginning studies with the modernist composer Charles Seeger. Seeger was not a huge fan of his pupil's work at first, but they ended up becoming much closer, and they ended up marrying 2 years later in 1932. Her music was seen as representative of American modernism, and it represented the school of thought at international festivals. In the 1930s, she was even awarded a Guggenheim Scholarship to go to Europe to study with European modernists, with the idea that she would come back with a major orchestral piece. And even though she went and studied, the piece never materialized. With her marriage, she became the stepmother of folk singer Pete Seeger, who was probably the most famous of the Seeger clan. Her husband's work as an ethnomusicologist fascinated her, and he eventually got a job working as part of the US government. But at that point, most of her major pieces were behind her. The Seegers, along with their prickly sometime friend Carl Ruggles, devised something that would become known as dissonant counterpoint, where the rules of traditional species counterpoint were completely flipped on their heads. Where you would find stepwise motion, you'd find skips, or where you'd find consonance, you'd find dissonance, and vice versa. Uniquely, Crawford Seeger was an unheralded proponent of serialist methodology, and was among the first to apply Schoenberg's 12-tone technique to aspects of music other than pitch. Her masterpiece, String Quartet 1931, written in, 1931, she devises a unique way of treating a 12-tone row. Instead of the standard practices of flipping the row upside down or backwards or upside down and backwards, she uses a process called rotation, where she would take the first note of the row and just simply stick it on the end. Thereby, the one row that she came up with in the first place could generate a set of 12 unique rows, each slightly different from the last. Much of the rest of her life was devoted to folk music and ethnomusicology, although she would occasionally indulge herself in some gratuitous modernism. Mostly she was active in the field of music education, including publications that utilized folk melodies as kids' initial introductions to music. Unfortunately, in 1953, when it seemed as if she was going to return full-time to composition, she passed away of intestinal cancer at the age of 52.